Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have returning guest Bob Mitchell with us, a journalist, best-selling author, researcher, lecturer, executive for MUFON Canada, and co-founder of Toronto Newswire Services. Now, a couple of Bob's most recent books, Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind, as well as Intrusion, Alien Encounters, are going to be the main focus of discussion here tonight because there's just a bunch of stuff in there that I know many of you that listen to the Leak Project enjoy hearing about. So these are just a few of Mr. Mitchell's gems from a collection of several books that he's put together. So quite the resume, Bob. And last time we spoke, it was about the book Forbidden Knowledge, Tales of a Multi-Dimensional Time Traveler. And I spoke with you as well as Jason. That was just a great podcast, a lot of really good reviews. I really enjoyed that. And when I read that book, you put it together so well. It was just very exciting to read. I had a tough time putting it down. So let's dive into your most recent works. And first of all, how the heck are you?
I'm fabulous, Rex. Our Forbidden Knowledge is still #1 on Amazon's Kindle and going strong. And now it's time to get back to the normal alien type stories that I usually have been doing. And What If Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind is the kind of book that I think people, your listeners, will be both informed and entertained. And that's what I try to do every time I write something. I like to inform and entertain at the same time. And certainly there's a lot of different kinds of stories in that book that have never been told anywhere else before. And they're all first-timers in the book and all very different. And I'm sure that the listeners will be intrigued by what I have to tell them.
You hear that, folks? You're going to hear it here first at the Leak Project. That'd be great, Bob. Let's get into that. Some of these these close encounters of the unusual kind. What's the first one that comes to mind?
Well, one of my favorite stories is actually the first one in the book, What If Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind. And it's my favorite story because it took me in a completely different direction than any other alien experience story that I ever encountered. And it also kind of opened my eyes to another possibility. And I think after the listeners will hear this story, they will more likely than not have a different take on what abductions could be and how connected we are to just everything in this universe. So it's a very, very interesting story, and you just want me to tell it? Is that the way you want me to do it?
Yeah, Bob, that'd be great. Let's jump right in. Walk us through it, like describe it as you would in the book to where we're kind of engulfed in the story.
Yeah, and if you have any questions, please stop me, and I'll be happy to answer them. And if anybody who's listening has a question, I'll take that too.
Perfect.
But the person in the book that told me this experience is his name is Satya Anand. Now, Satya Anand is actually his real name, or a name given to him by a Tibetan monk. It's not the name people would know who he goes by here in North America. He's fairly well known in Canada, this person, and he's a producer, director, a 2-time daytime Emmy-winning producer in the United States a few years ago with some things he did on the Discovery Channel. But at the time we were sitting down to talk about his experiences, he was in negotiations with some people who were going to give him several $1 million to do a project. And he wasn't quite sure what the reaction would be from them if they found out he had this other side to him. So we decided not to go with his real name, per se, that people would know him by, but still go with a name that was given to him by a Tibetan enlightened master, basically. So he's a real person, and it's his real name. It's just not the name that most people would know him by. But the story is absolutely true. So he was born in Montreal and grew up in a normal family. There was nothing unusual about him except that he got into meditation very early in life, and it became basically a lifelong passion for him and something he did every day and still continues to do every day. And he was fascinated by some of the people he met in Montreal who seemed to have connections to people in Tibet. And there was a family that not only had connections to Tibet, but they took their son over to Tibet to meet one of these enlightened masters. And so Satya thought that was really cool that a parents would do that. So he begged them to give him the contact information for this enlightened master, and eventually they did. And he went over to India with some friends originally, but actually spent about 29 years of his life, not all at once, but off and on, with 9 different trips over to India, and actually stayed in one of those Tibetan temples and learned everything he could about mysticism and reincarnation. He became a firm believer in reincarnation, and he also became very, very adept at astral traveling, much like Jason Quitt could do. Although he didn't have the same, time travel experience that Jason Quitt did. His was just the normal astral traveling, where he would leave his body and just sort of go to places and experience the oneness with the universe. Now, when I was first sat down to talk to him, I didn't know much about astral traveling, and I had heard about it and really didn't know anybody who ever did it before. But I'm since finding out with our book Forbidden Knowledge that quite a lot of people seem to know how to do this. But to me, it was completely foreign. So I asked him, how do I know that any of this is really true, that you have been doing this? And he told me a story about how when he was over in India, his girlfriend at the time was back in Montreal in the townhouse they were sharing. And he did an astral traveling from India where he left his body and actually went into the townhouse that they were sharing with. And much to his surprise, his girlfriend was having an affair with somebody else. And he saw it clear as day. And back then, we didn't have the cell phones. We didn't have the internet that we have now. There wasn't instant text messaging. So what he did was he did a small tape recording on one of those mini cassettes and put it in the mail. And I guess 2 or 3 weeks later, it arrived in Canada. And when he arrived 6 months later, he went to the girlfriend's house, and she was quite embarrassed and admitted the entire affair that he had seen happening before his eyes, even though they were thousands and thousands of miles apart. So in my mind, I don't know the girlfriend, never talked to her, but I had no reason to believe he was lying to me. So I thought, well, that's pretty neat that he could have done that. But all his experiences were, in the astral world with 360-degree vision, and really wasn't into UFOs when this was going on, and didn't know much about aliens at all. He might have heard about the Greys, but it was just something he just wasn't interested in. Didn't even it wasn't even something he believed in, I don't think, at the time. But one day, about I think it was 5 years ago now, he was with some friends, and they came back to his Toronto condominium, and his friends went on the balcony, and he decided he was just going to go into the bedroom for a few moments and have, I guess, a power meditation nap, just to recharge his batteries, I guess. And he laid down, and then the way he tells the story is almost within seconds of lying down, and he had this feeling like he was being shot out of a cannon, out of his body. And it was a different experience than he had usually had with astral traveling before. And what happened almost immediately, he not only was shot out of his body, but he was shot through the roof of the house and he up through the atmosphere. And before he knew it, he was in outer space and traveling very fast. And he could actually see the planets go by. And he could recognize the Earth, and it was getting smaller and smaller. And then, Mars and Venus and all the planets. But as this was happening, he actually looked down at himself, and lo and behold, it wasn't this 160-degree experience that he had had before. At this time, he could see his body. He could see the Docker pants that he had on when he would lie down in the bed. He had the same running shoes on. He had the same T-shirt. He could feel his face and his hair. And so he was in this physical form, yet he was traveling through outer space without a space suit on. He was breathing fine, and he was just accelerating faster and faster, and could not figure out what was going on. And eventually, he left the solar system, and he expected to see more stars and keep going. And suddenly, he found himself in just utter blackness. There was nothing around him whatsoever. But as he sort of floated there, because the acceleration had stopped, and as he floated there, he had this feeling that there was something or somebody watching him, staring at him. It was almost eye piercing. He described it as if you're in a car and you're stopped at a stop sign or stop light, and you look over because the person in the car next to you has been staring at you, and when you quickly look over, they turn their head quickly so they don't want you to know. It was that sense that something was staring at him, and it was really strong. And suddenly, in the distance, something is coming towards him. And You got to remember, he doesn't know anything about aliens really other than grays. So before he could, take a deep breath, if that was possible in outer space, but before certainly he had any emotions of fear or horror, what he was looking at, right in front of his face, like within inches of his face, was this huge being. And he describes it as being at least 30 feet tall, perhaps even bigger. And it had giant eyes in the head. And the head, he thought, had to be at least 5 feet large, because the eyes were 3 or 4 feet big. And it had the image of almost a mechanical insect. That was the way he described it, because the head seemed to be like an insect, but the long arms that were flailing by its side, they seemed almost mechanical in some ways. But instead of feeling fear, the only emotion that came to him, and it was a very, very strong emotion, was this overwhelming feeling of love and attachment to this being. And it was kind of love that he said was stronger than even the kind of love that you would have for your parents or even your wife or girlfriend. It was this intense love that filled his entire body. And while he's there, there's a telepathic communication. And during this telepathic communication, he has this feeling that he knows this being, and it's so strong that he asks this being, have we been together before? And the answer he gets back is yes from the being. And then he says, he looks at the being and he looks at himself, and he telepathically says to the being, in your form or in my form? And the answer he gets back is, it's in the being's form. And that really freaked him out at that point. And then he asks him, will we be together again? And the being says yes. And again he says, in your form or my form? And the being says, in its form. And within seconds of that, he finds himself back in his bed, and he wakes up. And when he wakes up, he has this wow moment, because all his life he believed in reincarnation. He believed that he has had past lives on Earth, and that he has possibly even been an animal or a plant, but it was always Earth-based. And now suddenly he had this revelation that reincarnation wasn't just something that happened on Earth, but when you came back, you could come back as anything in the universe, because we all were connected to one source. And sometimes you live a life as an alien, and sometimes you live a life as a human being. And he quite soon tried to look up on the internet to find anything that resembled what he had seen up there. And he eventually found something, and of course it was the well-known mantid creature that has been very popular in the last 5 years at least. People are talking all about mantids all the time. And in fact, in my book, Intrusion, Alien Encounters, there's 2 people that have had mantis experiences. And although their experiences were with 7 or 8 foot tall creatures, they all had the exact same overwhelming love for this creature. It wasn't any fear whatsoever. So after digesting what Santa Anya had said to me, and knowing that other people have had this experience, it seemed to me that this love, this strong connection, is actually something that has happened in a past life. That these are celestial beings that are part of everybody's makeup, and that the reason there's so much love between them is that they're actually probably looking at your relatives from another timeline maybe, or from another dimension, but somehow the mantis beings are connected to humans, because most humans who have had abduction experiences certainly don't describe abductions by grays or hooded beings as being nice and loving. It's always fearful and horrible. So I think the Santa Anna's experience may just open the doors to a lot of people who have had these experiences. It certainly made me rethink some of the things that were happening. And in fact, maybe if I can take that even one step further, if reincarnation does exist everywhere in the universe, perhaps that when people are being abducted, and I believe they're probably being abducted mostly in a conscious form, not in a physical form, but when they're abducted into like the 4th dimension or other multi-dimensions, that perhaps they are being abducted by their own relatives. That somewhere along the line they've told them that when they come back in this form, you will be taken back to see us again. Because so many people that I've talked to during their abduction experiences, at some point, they have a telepathic communication that says to them, we're doing this because you agreed to this. And I don't know anybody who would agree to such an experience unless there was something that they can't remember. And to me, that all connects somehow, that we're all connected in the universe. And what we think is a bad experience probably is an experience that most abductees have agreed to in another past life.
Now, have you talked to people that have been abducted against their will and have been basically tortured, or what they describe as very painful? Okay.
Yeah. In my book, there's a lady named Josie, sorry, and she's had very horrible experiences. But I must tell you, after some of her experiences, she did have the same telepathic communication that told her, "You agreed to this. Don't worry. It's just part of your path." So I don't know what that means, because she says, I certainly would not have agreed to what they were doing to me. But in any event, what happened to her was, just like Santa Anon, she had no real knowledge of UFOs. She grew up on a native Canadian reservation in Newfoundland and had a real bad childhood, basically lived in a shack with no running water or no heat or anything. And eventually, when she was old enough, she left and came to Ontario and made a life for herself, and had a relationship that didn't go very well, but she had a young daughter out of it. And one day she just decided that she needed to get out of Toronto, so she moved outside of Toronto, and everything was fine, except suddenly she started being able to contact dead relatives of people. For out of the blue, she became a medium, and she has no idea why that happened or how it happened. It just sort of started, and one day there was a woman that she was doing I guess you call it a service, or I don't know what you call it when you do somebody in a mediumship, but the woman kept saying, "You're supposed to meet this person," and she gave the name of the person, and of course Josie had no idea who this person was, and eventually during one of her it wasn't a seance, it was more like a knowing of something that a dead person wanted to tell them. She got this image of a person, and even thought that this lady had a relative of this particular name. I can't remember the name right now, but it turns out it wasn't the name that this person usually went by. So when they did finally meet, he was into UFOs. And it sort of convinced her to go to the Alien Cosmic Expo last summer in Brantford, which I was at giving my talk on some of the people in my book Intrusion. And I actually met her there, and we got talking. And it turns out about 6 months before she went to this UFO show, she started having these incredible experiences, and they always started the same way. In fact, as long as she can remember, even as a child, she had terrible nightmares, although when she woke up, she couldn't remember anything. But now as an adult, she was having these nightmares every night. And it was always the same. There would be this terrible nightmare. She'd wake up shaking. She'd sit up in bed. She was frightened and couldn't remember anything. And then almost immediately, she had an astral out-of-body experience. And this was something she had never experienced before in her life either. And she would find herself on spaceships and lying on tables and gray-like beings, although she said they weren't actually the kind of grays most people think of being grays, but they did have big eyes, and for the want of a better description, they were grays. And they were torturing her. I mean, they were sticking things in her, up her, and she remembers screaming. The pain was unbearable, and at one point she said it felt, and looking at it, it was as if they actually took a hand and put it right through her stomach, and she could feel this pain all the time. Another time they put something down her mouth, and she thought she was going to die because she couldn't breathe, and they kept telling her, relax, relax, we're not going to harm you, and you've agreed to this. And that really confused her. But what really confused her even more was, and this is where I get back to where I think a lot of abductions are actually taking place in the conscious world, in the fourth dimension, is that before she ended up on the spaceship, it felt to her as if she was flying and that she was in the eyes of a bird. although she couldn't feel the wings or anything, she could see all around her, and she had this sense she was a bird flying. And when she got in the spaceship, she actually would tell me that she couldn't see her body. She could only see what was happening to her. And that sort of goes along with what I'm thinking, that the abductions are taking place there. It's your consciousness that's being taken somewhere, because you're lying on in bed, usually sometimes with your spouse, and the spouses say, you never went anywhere during these experiences. And Josie had a young child, and at no time during any of these experiences did the young child ever come running in screaming for mommy, saying, "Where are you? Where are you?" So she was there in consciousness, and we all know that the mind is where pain really exists. So if you don't realize you're there in consciousness and you think you're there in your physical body, I think it's quite understandable to think that when experiments are being done to you, you're actually feeling physical pain. She said the pain was just overwhelming, and but there were never any scars on her body until one time she had a scar on her chest, and it was she thought it might have been some kind of reaction to something she had been washing with, but it never went away for a long time. It didn't hurt, it didn't itch. It just was an elevated, almost scar tissue that disappeared eventually. But that was the only physical trait that she had been anywhere, but there was a lot of psychological memories about that. And a couple times she remembers being in a spaceship and actually seeing cities, and the cities to her looked like they were just sort of floating in the air above the land. And there's also one time she felt as if she was in a single spaceship, almost like a pod, and yet while she was traveling to this distant planet, at this time when she looked down from her eyes, her hands actually looked like that of a typical gray, that there were 3 fingers. So what I took from that is perhaps that when you do experience some of these things, to be able to take you places, your consciousness has to go into another physical entity to be able to withstand such a journey. Other than that, I have no reason to. I don't really know why she thought she was a gray at this time. But again, the theme was there that you've agreed to this. Don't worry, we're not going to hurt you. And she still has these nightmares today. And she's actually going to be one of the guest speakers at this year's Alien Cosmic Expo, talking about this. But
where's that at? And when?
It's in Brantford, Ontario, which is about an hour's drive west of Toronto and another hour drive east of Buffalo. And it's June 24th to the 26th. And so that and here was a person that didn't want to tell anybody her story before, but she felt she needed to tell somebody it. And that's the interesting thing about all the people that I have dealt with in my 2 previous books that deal with experiencers. Every single one of them mostly hid all these stories from everybody but their really close family members or close friends. In some cases, they didn't even tell their family members. But they were all between 40 and 60 when they told me their stories. And it was almost this dirty little secret or a burden that they've been carrying around all their lives. And after talking to me, they all said that this tremendous feeling had been relieved, and that they now felt like almost completely different people. That they no longer were afraid to talk about it. That they got something off their chest that they kept hidden all their lives, and it felt so good to be able to tell somebody. And now they don't care what anybody thinks of them. They know 100% that they've had these strange experiences. So, in some ways, I feel like I've helped a lot of people, even though I'm not a psychologist. I'm certainly not not a doctor of anything. But I'm a good listener, and I seem to be able to get people to tell me their deepest secrets. So, it's been an incredible, interesting ride for me as well as for them.
Sure. I definitely need to get you in contact with a couple of people that have reached out to me here at the Leak Project. Their testimonies are astonishing with what they've seen and been through. It's incredible. And matter of fact, some people that I know that won't come on the show, some of the stuff that they've told me is just, it'll blow. It's more incredible than what we've, it's just blow your mind type stuff. I mean, it's like something out of a science fiction movie.
I know. And we always think of abductions as being, just they come down, pick you up and take you up and do some experiments on you and then drop you back off. But I'm finding that everybody has a different slant, and there's something slightly different to every experience. And it's not just you pick you up in a spaceship and take you somewhere. There's all kinds of things that go on during these experiences, and the rational mind can't explain it. But and that's part of the reason why I think some of these people are so afraid to come out, because it's not something you can go to your doctor and talk about. It's not something you put on a resume. So who are you going to talk to? And
Right.
and one of the people that I did talk to from my Intrusion book, her name is Marian Anderson. And she is an amazing person because she is completely deaf. And I met her at one of the very first UFO meetings that were held in Brantford when I first moved to Brantford and began working with MUFON. We decided to have a chapter in the town I live in just to see if there was any interest. And we booked a coffee shop, put a little ad in the local newspaper, and thought maybe we'd get 10 people showing up at the coffee shop. And little did I know the interest in our area, because we had about 75 people show up to that first meeting. We couldn't fit them all in the coffee shop. Everybody had a story to tell. And there was this Marianne lady who, she was waving her arms and trying to get my attention, and she eventually did. And of course, when I went up to her, I couldn't understand what she was saying. She did speak out of her mouth, but it was, like a lot of people who are hearing challenged, they don't pronounce things the right way, so you were only getting every second or third word. And so she wrote it down saying she has stories to tell me, and she'd love for me to come to her house to hear it. And I couldn't figure out how I would do that, because certainly I didn't know anybody that had sign language, but she assured me that she would have somebody there who would help me understand what she had been going through. So I showed up at her house, and her boyfriend's son and daughter both were knew sign language. So they helped me through understanding her story. And she had the typical stories of beings coming through her walls, through a portal, grabbing her out of bed. And you have to remember, she is living completely in a silent world, so she can't hear them, and she can scream, but this is all very terrifying to her, because she can't explain this to anybody. And I thought, well, how terrible it must have been for her growing up, because it's hard enough for people who can see and speak to explain what has happened to them, or even tell anybody. Imagine if you lived in a world of total silence for all your life. And I mean, I didn't even know if there was such a sign language for UFO or aliens. And with her waving her arms like that, people would automatically assume that she was crazy, and they would probably run away from her. So her stories were quite incredible. And the most amazing thing about the whole experience is that over a period of several months, as she was telling me her stories that appear in the book Intrusion, Alien Encounters, she became a different person. She started out this very introverted person that I had met at this coffee shop, and by the time the book had come out, she was actually standing up at these meetings and now speaking, and people could understand her without sign language. It was just an incredible transformation, and she says because she was able to tell something that she had kept hidden all her life, that now she felt invincible and almost felt like she owed it to every deaf person around to tell her story. Because I looked on the internet at the time, and I still do every once in a while, and I have never ever found another deaf person who's an experiencer. So I don't know if there is. I mean, there probably are, but no one that I can tell has ever come out and told their story before. And the other incredible thing about this is that she's become a pretty good friend of mine and my wife's. And when she comes to our house, almost instantaneously when she met my wife, there was a connection somewhere, and she was able to use sign language. My wife was able to talk with her by moving her hands around, and my wife doesn't know sign language. But whatever she was doing, she could understand perfectly what Marianne was saying. And in fact, it was so funny because I'd be in the same room and trying to listen to her, and she'd be telling me, no, get my wife to tell her what she's saying. It was bizarre, but
That's pretty cool.
I know, she just became so, and she's going to be at the Alien Cosmic Expo too, on Experience Day, and she now paints. So she paints pictures of aliens and angels and all this stuff. it's, in one of the episodes that she had, she was taken on a spaceship, and she looked down, and there was this giant tidal wave that came over and was destroying all the homes in the area that she was living at the time. She was never able to figure out if this was a future vision, but she had lived for some part of her life on the West Coast in Vancouver, and we all know that Vancouver is on a fault line and a tidal wave line, and so who knows if that was a vision of the future that she had. Her very first encounter with aliens, she has a clear memory of this, and this was when she was just a baby in a crib, and she was an orphan. She was in a Toronto orphanage, and at the time she had some hearing, but there was something wrong with the eardrum, because every sound people made, it was excruciatingly painful. And so with all kinds of kids in the orphanage, there was this noise continually, and she cried all the time because the pain was unbearable. And one night, she recalls that 3 alien beings came to her, stood over her, and touched her ear. And at that point, she went completely deaf, but the pain ended. So she figures that somehow there was some connection, and they helped her. She doesn't look at it as being something bad. She looks at it as something that she needed to go through. And a few years later, she also recalls being in a nearby park where she was walking down a path and suddenly saw a spaceship and a little being in front of it. And when she looked to the left, there were several other children all being led into this spaceship. And the being was motioning her to come too. She did walk up very close to the spaceship, but something told her not to go any further. At least that's what her memory is allowing her to remember. She doesn't know whether she actually went on that spaceship or not. But from what I understand, talking to many experiencers, a lot of their experiences end with blackouts, where you don't know what's happening at some point during the experience. So, for all she knows, she may have been taken aboard that ship. But to her, she's never had any bad experiments done to her that she can remember. Although almost every single experience ends in a blackout period. So who knows what's been going on to her? But maybe that's something they do so that she doesn't remember some things that might have happened to her.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I'm thinking of a gentleman we had here on the Leak Project a while back that reached out to us. His name is Ray, and says he's a lifetime contactee, and he claims to have made contact with all sorts of different types of extraterrestrials, and even, I guess you could say, interdimensional or outer dimensional beings. And one that, and talking to him, I mean, some of the stuff is so far out there that you can tell he's genuine when he's talking about it, that he's not just making it up, but you're just like, wow, I mean, is he, is this, how much of this is true in his imagination? But one thing that was very fascinating was he talked about these elephant people. And,
elephant people? Oh.
Yes, and that have an elephant head and a regular body. And then to collaborate his story, somebody else reached out to us a while later named Boris, and I think I talked to you about this guy before, where he can basically, he summons up, or whether or not he summons them up or they just follow him around, he goes outside almost every day in the Bronx and records these UFOs around other people in the daytime and says they contact him telepathically. But he also said, Ray was talking about the elephant people. I know them. I've seen them before. And I was like, you've seen them physically? And he said, yeah.
Huh. I have never run into anybody that seen an elephant person before. I have run into people who say they've seen what appears to be a salamander type being, and that's not to be confused with a reptilian. This is a completely different kind of a species. But in the dimensional world, I think there are hundreds, if not thousands, different kinds of beings. And a lot of the dimensional beings are able to interact with our third dimensional world. We just can't interact with them unless we go into an astral body presence. So, but that's a new one. The elephant one I have not heard yet.
Oh, yeah, he had a whole bunch of them, man. I mean, that was actually probably one of the least interesting that he talked about. What are some other ones that you've written about, Bob?
Let me just see something else interesting that is really different.
The salamander people, though, I've never heard of that.
The salamander. It's a strange story because at one point during my interview with his name is Brett Yacobucci, and he's an energy worker, and he used to be at one point a paranormal investigator, but he's now an energy worker. And when he was telling me his experiences, and they range from abduction to the point where he's on spaceships and they're being involved in a battle with some other beings, to having physical experiences in another timeline where there's a war going on between aliens and people on Earth, and humanity isn't doing very well. It's basically a scorched Earth, but not a nuclear type Earth. It's just that everything's been destroyed and people are just living day to day, foraging as the aliens, trump over all the Earth. But when he was telling me these stories, he was telling me that at one day he was able to connect energetically to another being in another dimension, and he says this is a being, and he calls it the salamander people, and it's a being that really doesn't show itself to many people at all unless you have the ability to find them, and for some reason he had the ability to find him, and when he did, the salamander started telepathically talking to him. And while he was having this conversation with me, telling me things, the salamander kept interrupting us. And it was really weird while I was sitting there, because he'd stop talking and you'd see him almost in a trance. And then he would come out of it and he'd telling me that he's made a mistake. The salamander says, this is what really is happening. And at some point during that conversation, I actually started talking to the salamander through him. Now, at least that's what he told me. I have no way to verify if I was or not. It was just in his own mind that I was doing it. But it was an interesting experience to be able to talk to some other being, even if it was a fabricated thing. It was just it just seemed very surreal when I was doing it. But one of the things that beings had told him and actually showed him was that during one of his encounters on a spaceship, he was shown a map of the Earth. It basically was a hologram map of the Earth, and there were all these red, blue, and green dots all over the Earth. And he was told that the red dots represented alien bases on Earth that were benevolent to humans, and that in some cases they were actually interaction between Earth governments and these aliens. The blue dots represented the bad guys, and the green dots represented aliens that really don't have anything to do with anybody. They're just here using it as a stopover, or just some place to live while they're doing something else, but have no interaction one way or another. The interesting thing is, most of the blue, the bad things, were centered in the United States, and most of the good ones were around the Great Lakes region of Canada. I don't know what to make about that, but it was interesting that the bad ones are somewhere down in your part of the neck of the woods.
Washington D.C., huh?
Mm-hmm. But the Great Lakes, they were supposed to be fine. Who knows? He absolutely believes this, and the wars that he experienced, there actually was the wars were actually involved what we would call the reptilians or dracoids. They were the scourge of the Earth at the time, and there were other gray beings that were actually helping mankind try to fend off the alien armies, but we weren't doing that good apparently. But everybody has a story to tell, and one of the most interesting stories in the book, it's not my favorite story because I really don't know what to make about it. It's Sinta Asia Narat.
Okay.
And that is, I'll tell you how I came in touch with her. When I was writing my intrusion book at the time, I was trying to get stories that were believable to some extent. That it wasn't things that people would say, well, this is completely off the rocker, and who's going to believe this? So she contacted me and emailed me first, and her story was pretty wild. She said she had been in contact with an alien race, and that she is very close to them, and that they've told her all about their society, and she's being watched over by one of their Air Force pilots who was connected to her. and that she had a story to tell me. And at the same time, she said people aren't going to believe me, and they're going to think I'm nuts, and that's fine because yeah, if I am insane, then I've gone insane in a most delightful way, she said. So I looked at it and thought, well, this isn't somebody that's going to be for this book anyways, and I just put it back in my mind and kind of forgot about it for a while. But then when I started writing What If book, I thought, well, I'll see if she's still around, and gave her an email, and she was, and we started talking and communicating, and before I knew it, she was giving me far more information than I really could use in the book. And in fact, by the time I got finished, I had enough for a book just on her own, but I cut it down as much as I could and put it in the What If book. But it still runs about, the book is about 350 pages, and I would say almost 100 are her story. And it's actually a story that I'm going to put in a PowerPoint and actually deliver at this year's Alien Cosmic Expo. And I'll tell the listeners about her, but I want to preface it by saying that she has an interesting tale to tell, and she's a law enforcement officer in the province of New Brunswick. So I would have to think that being a law enforcement officer, that you have to pass some kind of psychological test. At least I would hope you would. So she obviously passed it. But what she has to tell you is that she has been in contact with the Greys, or at least what we call the Greys, but they're known as the Ataraku. And they're from the Orion star system. And the one of the biggest problems with her story is that she insists, based on what the Greys are telling her, is that the Greys are absolutely the only alien species that have ever visited Earth. And that to me doesn't make any sense, because how many people I have talked to have had experiences with other beings. Although, again, I must preface it, perhaps some of these experiences are, again, happening in the fourth dimension and not really happening in the physical dimension here on Earth. But in any event, she says that not only are they're the only race that's come here ever, like in the millions of years, they are the only race that's ever been here. They helped create mankind, and they've been overseeing our civilizations for all these years. And while there are other benevolent species around the world, in the other universes, they insist that most of them have no idea that Earth even exists, and that none of them, except the Ataraku, have the technology and the sophistication to be able to come here. So I have come to the conclusion that if she is telling the truth and that she is in a telepathic communication with a being who say they're the Greys, then perhaps they are deliberately lying to her. And if they are deliberately lying to her, I have to find a reason why, and I'm not so sure I know that reason. That's assuming she is really in telepathic communication. She has been given images that she has sketched for me, and she's a pretty good artist. She knows their language, she knows their songs, their history, their society, who they are, their contact with the Earth, and she also insists, or the Ataraku insists, telling her that they are not the sinister race that they have been made out to be, but in fact are a very benevolent race, that violence is not part of their makeup, and their whole purpose is, for the weapons they have, is defensive weapons and to prevent Earth from destroying itself or blowing itself up. So it's an incredible story because she has so much detail, and I have to think, why would somebody go to the lengths she has to just make this up and fabricate a story? Either she has the greatest imagination in history, or she really is in telepathic communication with something. I'm just not quite sure it's the story she has been fed. But I can tell you a whole bunch of more stuff about it if you want.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I just wanted to interject real quick.
Yeah, sure.
It's sometimes so tough to discern from truth and make-believe, and then, well, what is truth? I mean, if somebody truly believes it, if they're seeing that and feeling that event, yet nobody else is, does that mean it's not true? I don't know. I mean,
I don't know either. But it's just the fact that she says, they say that no other alien species has ever been here. Right. We have, like, how many people, I'm sure people have been on your program to talk about the reptilians, and I talk about the mantis, I talk about hooded beings, all kinds of different Greys, and what about all the whistleblowers that talk about things.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't make sense. I asked her a lot of different events that are well known that involve aliens, and I got some surprising answers. Roswell, she said, did happen, and that it did involve them, and that there was 2 crashes, and that I think it was 7 beings crashed, and the 2 craft that crashed were actually how can I put this? They were not on a mission. They sort of took it upon themselves. They had enough of living on the this giant space craft that's hovering in our orbit, and just wanted to let off some steam, I guess. And so they were on an unauthorized mission, and they didn't control the craft quite as well, and that's how they crashed. And she says that 5 of them died instantly, 2 were captured. One of them died quite soon afterwards, and the other one only lasted for a couple of days. Now, the stories that we've heard all along is that the United States had one alive for possibly as long as a year or longer, and that the Americans were able to get information that allowed to do reverse engineering. And according to what she's been told, one of the main tenets of being an Ataraku, especially a member of their Air Force, is that they die before they give out any information about technology, because they don't want technology to get into the wrong hands, particularly in militaristic hands, and that U.S. it was the military that had them. So they would never have said anything about their how their craft worked, or anything about their life, or anything at all. Basically kept silent the whole time. So if the United States did do some reverse engineering, it was stuff they did on their own from the crashed spaceship. It was never anything that was ever given to them by them. And again, she also says they say there have never been any agreements between the U.S. and them to, so allow abductions to take place in return for technology. That's just something they don't do. And she basically said that all the abduction stories and cattle mutilations and all that is all made up by the U.S. government to show that the aliens are bad guys. Why, I don't know, but they insist that they are peaceful and have never done anything. They said that Rendlesham Forest didn't happen the way that it's been shown to happen. They also said, and Travis Walton is a guy that's going to be at our Alien Cosmic Expo, and his story is well known, and I believe it 100%. But they said that his story didn't happen the way he said it happened. And they also said that Betty and Barney Hill didn't happen the way they said it happened. But ironically, the Battle of L.A. did happen, but it didn't happen as an invasion. It actually was a training mission for young Ataraku recruits to show the recruits that they can never show themselves in the airspace of humanity, because if they did, they'd immediately be shot at. So to prove that point, they showed themselves right after Pearl Harbor, or several months after Pearl Harbor, and the first thing that the military did on the coast there was to fire at them. Of course, they couldn't penetrate their ships, so it was like a teaching moment for the young Ataraku. So I don't know what to make of that. It's just, it seems so far-fetched, but again, the title of the book, what if everything she said is true and everything we have been told about other things is the lie? It's very perplexing to me.
You know who tells the story, right? Of history?
Yeah. It's
the victors.
We tell the victors, yeah.
Yeah, So whatever we know is what we're allowed to know based upon the victors allowing it, and maybe certain secrets and gems that have been passed on from different generations.
Yeah. I mean, we think of the Greys in some cases when people think they might be robots or not biological. Somehow they're clones or something. But she says that their physiology is basically very similar to humans. They have a heart, lungs. They have tendons and bones and cartilage, and they breathe air basically. Their society is almost a communistic society with a dictatorship at the rule, but nobody goes without. Everybody has a home. They have enough food. Drinking water is plentiful, and they don't smoke. They don't have alcohol. Most diseases don't exist, although they do have doctors and operating because while they can successfully repair things, the one thing they can't repair is brain damage apparently. But they can repair everything else. They can do, if you have a heart problem, that can be repaired very easily, and everything is used with light energy. They have very little crime, and in fact, she said, I think in the last 600 years, there's only been one murder in any of the two planets, and they live in two different planets, both with about 15 billion to 11 billion Ataraku on these planets. And when you do commit murder, there's no real trial. You're convicted and you're killed the same day, and you're either killed through incineration or you are sent to one of their two bug-infested planets. And the one murderer decided to be incinerated because he didn't want to be eaten alive by these insects. And some of the insects are quite big, but they're also a delicacy to some of them. And one of the insects, she said, was the size basically of a large lobster. And they have hunting excursions, 3 or 4 times a year to this planet just for this delicacy. Their family units. I mean, they do have family units, but it's interesting that they can have many multiple family units. So there's no such thing as marriage. But when children are born, the husband or the male is responsible for that child the rest of his life, and he gets a number, and the child is linked to the father. So whatever job the father has, he always has to provide for it. And while the women do work, their main job is to raise the children, and it's also to keep the population up. There's no big concern about having too many people. They just kind of feed the society, I guess. And she says that those large football-size spaceships that people have said they've seen in our skies, they are 6 such things that are actually in our skies, in our universe, and they travel in a much larger spacecraft from their planet, and it would take about 7 years of our time, but it doesn't take that long for them because they know how to travel at faster than the speed of light, and they use wormholes and other things to get here. But there's 6 of those. There's 6. Basically, they're like giant cities in the sky, and all of the ships can dock and connect to form bigger cities. And from that, they have 400 smaller football-sized spacecraft, and from that, smaller ones come out of there. So apparently there's quite a few in our atmosphere, above our atmosphere in outer space, and they say NASA knows all about them. And the governments, the people who need to know that they exist too. But they sort of will not provide any science or any technology as long as Earth is still in a war type mentality. When that ends, they'll be able to help us. So I've heard that story before. Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. But their average height's about 5'3", and they stop growing when they're about 15. So that's why they always look like little kids to people who see them. And they don't actually gray. She says they're more of a bluish greenish hue to them. So it's I don't know. She has so much information that it's mind-boggling to think that my God, what if she is right?
Right. Now let me ask you this as well.
Yeah, sure.
Have you done any documentation or research on the shape-shifting reptilian phenomenon?
I haven't, in the sense that nobody that I've ever talked to has ever told me about having an experience with a reptilian, other than Jason Quitt, who was my co-writer for the Forbidden Knowledge. I have had people talk to me about what we would call the Pleiadians and the Nords, but I have an interesting story to tell the listeners that isn't in any of my books, only because the lady that was telling me this decided she didn't want to tell me anymore. And she actually lived about 400 miles away from me, and she was very nervous when she was talking to me because she really didn't know me. But she told me a very very strange and horrific story that I have never heard anybody ever tell before either. So here's another one of those. If I was going to do this story, I would call it the Horror Factory, because that's what she called it. And her story is that her and her daughter's in her 20s, and she's in her, I guess, 50s now, or maybe 60s. They have been abducted continually, almost, several times a week for as long as they can remember. And it's not by greys, it's not by reptilians, it's not by anybody that we would normally think of as being aliens that we can recognize. These are always very little people wearing monk-type hoods, so you can't see them, but they are nasty, and they have these jagged teeth, and they come in groups, and they basically drag them out of their bed, and while they're screaming, and drag them down the stairs, and they do it both at the same time. So she's looking at her daughter, and the daughter's looking at her, and then there's a blackout.
But that reminds me of those little things those creatures you're talking about.
Yeah.
The movie Phantasm, back in the early '80s. You remember that?
Don't know that. When I think of that, I think of Star Wars, the little creatures with the hoods,
Oh,
But,
man, Phantasm! I'm telling you, they've got their creatures with little hoods, and they got those the fang type teeth, the real sharp teeth, and the evil eyes, and I'll have to post a link soon.
I always think that Hollywood and films like that are based on something that somebody has seen or heard or done something. And actually, I've had a couple other people that told me they've had encounters with these little creatures with hoods on, too. So there's always good to have a validation when you get more than one person. But in this sense, when they're being dragged and screaming, there's a blackout, and then the next thing they know, they are standing in, to them, what looks like a factory of some kind, and they have a sense it's underground because they don't see any lights, and it just looks like an underground facility. And there's a conveyor belt, and they're standing at this conveyor belt, and they have knives in their hands as they're standing at this conveyor belt. And while the conveyor belt is moving, suddenly animals, pets, dogs, cats, are coming down this conveyor belt, and they are being ordered to kill them and stab them on a conveyor belt. And she has no control over this. It's like her mind has been taken over, and as they're coming down, she is stabbing these animals. And she's an animal lover, and this really freaked her out. And off to the side, she sees military soldiers, and they look very human, so she assumes they are our military. And she also sees what looks like Palladians, tall, blonde people. There are no reptilians, there are no greys, nothing like that. There's just these people there. And this goes on for several nights where this is happening. And when she is returned and wakes up, it's just the most horrible feeling she can ever have. But it gets worse, because at some other times during these abductions, after they're dragged out of their rooms, they're standing on this conveyor belt again. But in some of these ones, she is not actively participating. She's sort of standing off to the side watching, the same with her daughter. And this time, coming down the conveyor belt are bits and pieces of humans. And it's while it's still horrifying, they've already been killed somewhere else, and the people that are there are sort of just examining them as they go by. But everybody's in a trance, and all the people that are standing on these conveyor belts are just like her, humans that have been taken that night. She was going to tell me a whole bunch of other stories about other beings and other horrific things, and then decided that she just couldn't relive all this over and over again. So we stopped talking, and one day I hope to communicate with her again, because certainly this is something that I have never heard of before, and I don't know if you have.
Well, I mean, I heard of the hooded beings by two different people, actually, separate testimonies, and actually the one was from Kimberly Broussard we had here on the show a while back. She's a housewife, doesn't have any books or website or anything like that. She just wanted to come on the show and give her testimony, and she talked about this one time she remembered seeing this short hooded being in her hallway looking at her daughter, and her daughter was complaining about having a headache all day, and then so she basically told it to leave, and it took off.
Well, these people couldn't take off. That's for sure.
I sent you a link. If you can actually click on that link on the Skype there to take a look at that picture of what I was talking about. I think it's kind of funny
let me see
because
it.
it's a
You
that was
sent
a
me
good movie, by the way. For those that haven't, the original Phantasm, just the story behind it. I know it's a dated movie, and the ones that came out after that were very rated type movies, but pretty cool genre back then. And just the whole archetype of the film was really cool. You had the tall man and these little robed things that were, like creations of people at one time that their souls were basically taken. Anyway, very fascinating film. It's kind of got its own cult following, but so
Yeah, I see it. I see it now. I'm just trying to figure out if I can click on it while I'm talking to you.
yeah, you should be able to.
It's on the It's on a Google thing. I said Phantasm, but
Yeah, just
it's
click
not-
it. Just click it. Did the Men in Black send another picture to you?
Oh yeah. Okay, I see. Oh, this one looks really nasty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the big one. I've seen the big one. Yeah, that looks.
There it is.
She described that she just saw their teeth. I think,
Okay.
but I don't know. I mean, that looks something like you wouldn't. Although one of my other experiencers did see another little man too, like that, and had red eyes and teeth, and she just thought they were the most nastiest thing she's ever seen in her life. But yeah,
Have you yourself seen anything real far out?
No, nothing that I would even say came close to what these people are saying. I mean, I had an experience that to this day I'm not quite sure what it was, but I can tell you a little bit about it. You still there?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, because it looked like you were disappeared there for some reason.
Oh no.
Okay, so about I would say 10 years ago now, I was still working as a crime reporter at the Toronto Star, and my wife at the time was she was working at an assisted living center nearby, handing out the meds, and she worked the late shift, so she usually came home after midnight. So this summer night, when she came home, we talked for a bit, and then I went to bed, and she stayed up to watch some TV. And I'm usually a very light sleeper. The slightest noise wakes me up, and I used to think I never slept. I would just had cat naps. But that night I fell into a deep sleep. And about 3 o'clock in the morning, she came running into the bedroom to wake me up, saying I had to get out of bed because there was this strange light that was punching a hole through the clouds in the dark sky. And so I got out of bed. At least she tells me I did. I have no memory of getting out of bed that night, at least at that point. And she says we went to the front room and she pulled the curtains back, and I looked up in the sky, and she describes it as being this basically a light, almost like a cylinder type light that was putting a hole right through the clouds. And at the same time, there was this tremendous wind storm around our house, to the point where the garbage cans were flying down the street, and the patio furniture in the backyard was just flying all over the place. Now, at that point, I do have a recollection of my wife going out front to get the garbage cans, and I went out back to get the patio furniture. And I have a recollection of walking out in the backyard, and it was pitch black out there. But when I walked out there, it felt as if it was broad daylight. And the strangest thing is that I have no recollection of looking up to see why it was broad daylight. But I do have a recollection of grabbing the patio furniture, and I do have a recollection of being in this almost like a whirlwind that was all around me. The wind was swirling, dust was in the dirt was flying up, and but it wasn't cold or hot. It was just wind. And I grabbed all the patio furniture, and because at some point the wind stopped, I was able to grab the patio furniture, and I remember doing that. My wife says she came in through the backyard gate, asked me if I needed help. I have a vague memory of her doing that, although I've told this story so many times, I'm not quite sure whether I do or don't, but for our purposes, I'll say that I did have a slight memory of that. And then I went in the house. Now, my wife says we sat at the couch and talked for a few minutes about this storm and how it came out and how this strange light in the sky. I have no recollection of that whatsoever. In fact, I have a recollection of going right back to bed. And the next morning, I woke up, and in my mind, it had been a dream. But it was a very vivid, almost a lucid type dream. And when I got up, I asked my wife, I said, did we get up in the middle of the night because there was furniture was going around and all this wind was blowing around? And she said, oh yeah, it was the strangest thing. She says it was just like this storm had come out of nowhere, and there was this light in the sky, and but we didn't talk anything more about it. And then I recall that day talking to one of my neighbors, and I mentioned about this big storm we had the night before, and they didn't know what I was talking about. So that seemed kind of strange, because both my wife and I had this vivid event happen, and we really didn't think anything about it for another 10 years. And then when I started writing stories about experiences, one night we were talking with some friends, and my wife brought up this event to us, but she added something this time that I had no recollection of. She says that when she came back into the backyard, I was standing in a blue light, which kind of freaked me out, because a lot of experiencers who I've talked to have told me that there's a blue light involved a lot of times, and it's the blue light that is taking them somewhere. So my wife insists I didn't go anywhere that night, and I don't remember going there that night, and I have no recollections of anything happened to me that night. But I think this summer I'm going to do some regressive hypnotism to just see what happened, one way or another. But I've never seen any kind of aliens per se. Although I must say that I have a friend that's a part of MUFON who has showed me a picture that he got from the police involving a woman who called the police because of an intruder that came into her house, and she took a whole bunch of pictures. And it wasn't until they got developed that there was something on this picture. And all I can say is that she took a series of pictures because her dog was a Labrador that seemed to be standing in place in complete suspended animation. There was no movement in front of the dog. She put her hand in front of the dog. There was no reaction. It was just staring towards a doorway that had been cracked a little bit. And so she was taking pictures down the hall just to see what the dog was seeing. And there are several pictures that when you blow up the pictures, in that crack in the doorway, there's what looks like to be an alien being that appears to have, I won't say it's a gray, and I won't say it's an insectoid, but it looks like a combination between an insectoid and a gray, but it's very small. It's bent over, almost like it's hunched, or almost sitting like you would do a squat and about to jump. And it appears that it has at least 4 legs. So this came from a police file, and they're still doing an investigation on this because they don't know what it is. And this person hasn't been allowed to actually, he's not supposed to have this picture, put it that way, so he can't release it to anybody, but I've seen it several times. So that's the closest I've been to anything that I really can't explain. This picture is very freaky. Anybody who has seen this, it's something that certainly it's a creature I've never seen anywhere on the internet or anything before.
That's incredible. That is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I've seen.
I absolutely wish I had it on my cell phone, because he won't give it to me on my cell phone.
Huh. I've seen stuff similar to that. Like I saw this one film on the internet. I mean, you can actually find it if you search for it, I'm sure. And it seems like there's this gray-looking type, this large head with the big eyes, but you can't tell anymore with digital photography if something's...
Yeah, I know. The fact that this is in a police file, that's what really intrigued me.
Right. That certainly adds to the
because
possibilities.
It does not look like the grays that we have seen, and it's certainly not a mantis being. I can tell you that. It's probably 4 feet tall, if that, and it's just crouching, staring. And then, as soon as it disappeared, the dog reacted again and started barking. So it freaked this lady out completely. I know that. So I don't know what to say about that. Yeah. It's I would love to be able to tell that story, but I can't. There's also another story I'd love to be able to tell, and they won't talk to me, but I'll give your listeners a little bit of it.
You've heard it here first, folks. Leak Project.
Yeah. There's and this person is actually friends with the person that has this picture, and so I know this person exists. he has had multiple experiences with the Greys, and to the point where he lost his wife over it because his wife thought he was a complete lunatic. They have a child together, and so they share custody. The kid is about 10 or 12, I believe, now. And basically, these creatures are continually coming into his house. They are experimenting with him. He's been taken many times. He has these horrible memories, and he doesn't know what they want from him. He has lost time many times while driving, and also stuff about even in his house. He'll be in one room, and the next thing you know, he's in another room, and several hours have gone by. At work one day, he worked in a factory, and while he was working, some of his employee friends they came and said that there was these two men outside rummaging through his car, and they described these men as being, the typical men in black. And of course, when he went outside, the men were gone, but the car that he had locked was open. They had been rummaging through the car, and they had changed all the settings on his radio. For whatever reason, he has no idea. But later that day, when he was at home, he happened to be looking out the window, and he saw two men in black again at a neighbor's house across the street. After they left, he went over there to find out what they wanted. The neighbor reacted with almost complete frightened. He was scared out of his wits, and told him never to come to his house again, and he knows what you're up to, and don't ever bother talking to him ever again. So whatever these men in black told this neighbor, it frightened the neighbor to pieces. So he's told his wife all these things, and she, has no belief in it at all. But one day, his 12-year-old son asked if they could go for a ride, and he said he had something to tell him, and he thought that it was something that his mother wanted to do, and he thought the worst, that they were going to move out of town and he wouldn't be able to see him anymore. And as they were driving, the kid said to him basically that, Dad, I just wanted to tell you that I believe you because they're now coming to me. So the son is now having all these same experiences with the Greys abducting him and all that. But it's a lifelong experience for him, and he will not talk to anybody. And he acts very close to me. But I've promised my friend who has the other thing that I won't bother him unless he really wants to talk. So when the kid says something, and that kid actually phoned my friend to tell him the story too, that they're coming to visit him now too. So his dad isn't the nutcase that his mom thinks he is.
So what are they thinking now then? Are they starting to realize, hey, we made a big mistake, or they still have that cognitive dissonance?
I think they're still not talking. I think she just thinks he's putting ideas into the kid's head. Yeah. But the kid is, at one point, he's seen them over a local cemetery. He's seen the flying saucers, and they have a light that's shining down on the gravestones, just almost as if they're looking for something. And
that's interesting.
There was one time when they were on this bridge near the gravestone, and my friend and him were there because he was showing him where this had happened. They didn't see the flying saucers that night, but he was just showing him where they happened, and it was about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. There was nobody anywhere around them. And, this is not a big city; it's a small town, so even the graveyard is not that big. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's a man that is right beside them, asking them if they know directions for something. And so they're startled, and they had never heard of the street the guy was looking for, but they never saw the guy come up to them, which was the strangest thing, because they would have heard him and would have seen something. There's no car. And when they turned around to talk to each other, and they went back, the man was gone. And my friend witnessed this, and it freaked him out completely too, because they don't know where he went. They don't know who he was or what he was doing there. It almost as if he was watching this other guy for some reason. So that only added to his paranoia. It's a strange thing. There was another incident too where he got injured at work and he hurt his eye. There was and he had to go home and he put a patch on his eye, and they weren't even sure if he was going to be able to see again quite clearly out of that eye. And he recalls where he was lying on the couch and he heard a commotion outside, and he looked out the front door, and he saw several people standing on his front lawn, and they were just shining these bright lights towards his house. And the next thing he knows, it's morning, and when he wakes up, his eye is completely healed. There's no damage. There's nothing. It's as if it never happened. So it's a freaky story. Again, it's one of those things, you got some validation, and it's always good when you have more than one person telling you something and somebody can sort of relate to too. So.
Well, at least he woke up with his eye healed and not
Yeah,
missing.
yes, that was the good thing.
There's a cyborg eye in there. How did it get there?
Yeah. But
It's
he
got
doesn't
lasers
know.
that are coming out of it now.
I mean, he doesn't know if he's got implants in him or anything like that. It's as I said, validation is very good when you're trying to talk to experiencers, and one of the ones in the book What If involves a guy named Wes Roberts, and he's actually a school teacher, and he's undergone about 30 to 40 regressive hypnotism sessions with a lady named Leslie Mitchell Clark, who is a well-known Canadian regressive hypnotist in Canada. She's actually now working with MUFON Canada and helping people. But Wes has had many regressions, and he has this feeling that he has lived multiple lives before, just like a lot of people. But his whole thing is that he is still living astral lives continually, and Leslie's actually convinced that he lives most of the life in another astral body, in another astral world, where he probably has families and other jobs to do. He has a physical existence here when he's teaching, and then when he goes to bed and sleeps at night, he's traveling, and he's actually living different lives. And he has had this experience throughout his life where there is a twin that seems to keep showing up wherever he is, both in physical and in an astral plane. And this twin is usually a female, although sometimes it's a light being, but it usually takes the form of a female. And in some of his experiences, the female is a sister. In other experiences, it's sort of a partner, a wife, or a girlfriend. And you would, just by hearing that alone, you're wondering, well, how is there any proof to this? Leslie has told me that on several occasions while he's undergoing hypnosis, that she actually has seen an entity or some kind of figure lying on top of Wes as he's sitting in the chair, lying down, and Wes's body actually becomes taller to form this twin, and this twin basically is tall with blonde hair, much like a Nord or a Palladian would be. And when the twin is there is a noticeable drop in temperature in the room, and she's seen it several times. So it's not just in his imagination, it's actually materialized in front of her. He has experiences where he feels that he is being transformed into something else, and he has memories and conscious memories, in fact, of being in front of a council of which appear to be aliens of all different kinds, and they're telling him that he is transforming into a higher energy being. He's not quite ready yet, and they also tell him that all humans will be doing that at some point. He's just better than most, and so he firmly believes that he's just in this life for one purpose, but his real purpose is as another being somewhere else.
That's an interesting story indeed.
Yeah. Which is why I called it unusual encounters rather than encounters of the third or fourth or fifth kind, because they don't actually fit into any category that we normally think of close encounters.
Right. And I think of some of the native stories that talk about how this, when you're awake, is more of the dream, when actually the dream is more of the real world. So interesting stories that go far back as well.
Yeah. There's a lady named Kelly, that I dealt with in my intrusion book, and she was at that first meeting that we had in Brantford, and she came up to me afterwards, and she said she had a story to tell me, and she said she hadn't told anybody else, and really wanted to get something off her chest, and she said, I don't know if you're going to believe me or not, but I'd really like to talk to you, and I said sure, and we made arrangements to go to her house, and I had to cancel one of the appointments, and I just left her a phone message, and I didn't hear back from her, and we were going to do it for the next, I think, a few days later. And when I did finally meet her at her home, she told me that after she had approached me that night at the coffee shop, she was really excited about telling me the story. But on the way home, she had this overwhelming feeling that she had betrayed somebody. And it was an awful feeling, like almost like she had betrayed her best friend to even reveal that she had had these experiences. And she said she almost called me to cancel the whole thing, but something told her not to. And we then had a lot of regular meetings, and we actually did some retrogressive hypnosis on her too. And it was an emotional series of interviews because she was reliving things that were happening. But she was basically born in California and spent all her childhood and young years in California. And her dad actually was a renovator of some kind, and actually renovated Groucho Marx's house at one point. But she met a Canadian, and they moved up here, and has really spent most of their last 35, 40 years as a Canadian living up close to the town I live in now. And she told me several interesting stories. One of them started when she was a young child, and her dad used to take her and her brother and the mom almost every weekend on a place called the Route Ridge, she called it, which is my understanding it was a trail that left Los Angeles and went up towards Bakersfield through the mountains. And the father used to go deer hunting. And at one day they were there, and near the time of when they were about to pack up, they saw what looked like a small plane crashing in the distance. And it went down, and the father said, well, there may be some survivors, we should go and see. And so everybody got packed up in the car, and they headed towards where this object had landed. And Kelly tells me the story that when they got to the area where it had landed, there was no smoke. There was no nothing that looked like a crash had landed. In fact, she says when she looked out the window, she saw a restaurant with Christmas lights. And that seemed to be completely strange, but she was, I think, a 7 or 8 year old girl at the time. And when she went to tell her family about this, the father was missing. He was no longer in the car. The mother was sound asleep, and she couldn't wake her up. Her brother, who was a little older, he couldn't wake up either. So she kept staring at this restaurant and thought that her father had probably gone into the restaurant, and she was interesting too, and she wanted to go and see what was in this Christmas restaurant. So she got out of the car and walked towards the restaurant. And remember walking up, they weren't stairs, it was almost like a plank. And when she got inside what she thought was a restaurant, as soon as she got inside, she realized it wasn't a restaurant. She didn't know what it was, being 8 years old, but there were two basic rooms in this building. And in one room, there was all these humans lined up along the wall, and they almost seemed like they were in a trance. She was trying to talk to them, but there was nothing. She got back nothing. Couldn't see anything else, but she looked into the second room, and in the second room she saw tons of what looked like operating tables with a light hanging down, and everybody on these tables were naked, and she recognized one of the beings as her father. And so that freaked her out, but then she tried to get the other people to get awake, and nobody would react. And at the time, she then looked towards her right, and she describes it as being this being that was on a pedestal, sort of looking down at her. And this being had what looked like a baseball cap on, And she called him the little captain. And the eyes were kind of not oval, but they were more slanted and thin, almost like you've seen that type of thing in the original Fire of the Sky movie, where they look like the beings look like little old men, but they're not quite. Anyway, she hadn't seen Fire in the Sky, and this was in the 50s, anyways, or 60s, can't remember now. So she called him the little captain, and her best friend was a Chinese girl. So in her mind, she thought she was looking at a Chinese person because it had the same kind of eyes. And from an 8-year-old mind, she wasn't thinking aliens or anything like that. The next thing she knows, she's in the car and they're driving back to Los Angeles. And nobody's talking about this. And it was as if the event never happened, except at one point her father suddenly tells everybody, how did it get dark so soon? Because it was now nighttime, and it was about 11 o'clock at night when it should have been about 6 o'clock at night. Years later, when her brother was dying of cancer, she remembers going to the hospital, and her brother at the time was so sick he never was, just in bed and was barely not even talking. But she asked him if he remembered the restaurant on the Routledge when they were kids. And when she said that, he sat up in bed and looked at her and said, I don't remember the restaurant, but I remember the ambulance and everybody in it. And so she has no idea what that meant. But the fact that she saw what she thought was a restaurant with Christmas trees, to me shows you that whatever these beings are, they can control your mind to see anything. And what better thing for a kid is Christmas. So there would be no way that she would be scared or anything like that. A few years later, she is down visiting her best friend again, and she lived up Pacoima, California, which is just outside of Los Angeles, I believe. And she left the house that day and played with her friend, and on the way home, she has to pass a vacant lot. And she's passed this vacant lot many, many times. But this day on the way home, when she passed the vacant lot, there's a house there. And she can't believe there's a house there. And it's got lots of windows, and the windows are flickering, and it's very inviting looking. And she says she can't figure out how a house suddenly appears, but for some reason she has to go into the house. So she goes into the house, and when she enters the house, she realizes quite soon she's no longer in a house. This time she feels she's in an oval room, and there are all kinds of lights on the wall. And she also sees behind a counter, it looks like dozens and dozens of fish tanks. And she thinks that's strange, but she's just so in awe about what she's being introduced to. And then suddenly, off to her left, a creature comes out. And this creature is wearing a white lab coat. And she calls this the doctor. And when she was describing this to me, she didn't really want to tell me what she was seeing because she thought I think she was completely nuts. And I said, no, please tell me describe what you saw. And she says, well, the only thing that came into her mind was this was an insect wearing a lab coat. And of course she was seeing a mantis being. And she had a familiarity with this, as if she had, seen this before, and they knew each other. And in fact, it was Kelly's birthday that day. And this creature knew it was her birthday. And Kelly actually asked the creature how old it was. And she said, I'm basically telepathically that I'm so old you wouldn't even comprehend it. So she didn't know how old she was, but she had been around for a long time. And at some point, Kelly remembers being convinced to lie on a table, but she had no real fear because she trusted this doctor implicitly. And she remembers lying on this table and looking over at the wall again, only this time when she looks at the wall, instead of seeing fish inside, she actually sees what looks like embryos of some kind. And some of them look actually like real children or infants that haven't been born yet. And then at some point, they tell her that she has to go and but step into the cylinder filled with greenish liquid. And Kelly nearly drowned when she was younger than this, and so she's deathly afraid of water of any kind, and getting into a tube of green liquid certainly scared her to death almost. But the creature, the insectoid, the doctor convinced her that it would be okay, and she remembers, getting into this tube and opening her mouth, and she could actually breathe, and it was a wonderful feeling. And then it ends, and she leaves the house, and she says goodbye to everybody there, and she goes home, and it's been a wonderful experience to her. She has no fear whatsoever. But I think she's 12 years old this time. I think that's what, or maybe 10 or 12. But anyway, she's very young, and as she's running home, she has this terrible pain in her stomach, and it's an unbearable pain that she's never experienced before. And she runs in the house and goes onto the toilet, and she ends up getting her period at that point. And she's only 10 years old. So the mother comes, and the mother tells her she's getting her period, and it's kind of early, but she doesn't think anything of it. Years later now, when we're looking at her through our adult eyes, we kind of think, well, perhaps they did something to her to cause that, because she was on a table and she doesn't remember what happened on that table. But she didn't have any really bad experiences. So the next day she got up and she wanted to go back and see these people in this house again, because she just loved being there. And she runs out of the house and she runs down the street, and when she gets to the vacant lot, it's just a vacant lot. And she can't figure out what has happened because the experience was so real. So these were experiences as a young girl where she really didn't have any fears. But then we fast forward several years later to when she's living south of Brantford in a house that's built in the 1800s, so it's a very old house. And she's in her house, and her husband's at work and her son's at school, and she decides that she's going to go up and start reading an Agatha Christie book. And so she gets everything ready. It's about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. She's not tired whatsoever, and she starts reading the book. And she recalls that she's reading the book, and as she's reading the book, this strange feeling comes over her. And it's a feeling that almost as if she's been almost being prepared for when you have an operation, that you've had some a needle put in your arm and you're about to pass out, but you're still conscious. And she can't figure it out. And the book drops out of her hand, and she's really fighting to stay awake. And suddenly she has a telepathic thought come into her mind. And the thought is, don't be afraid. Don't be alarmed. We're coming through your walls. And that freaks her completely out, to the point where she's really scared. And she can't understand what that thought means. And then all of a sudden, she starts hearing what appears to be footsteps downstairs, and it's creaking down on the stairs. Now, this is an old house, so the slight movements you can hear. There's nobody in the house but her. She doesn't have a pet at the time. And so she starts hearing these footsteps, and now she's becoming really paranoid. But as well as being paranoid, she's also basically paralyzed. It's like she's having sleep paralysis, but she's wide awake and conscious of what's happening. She can't move, yet she is experiencing and hearing these footsteps. And then she hears the footsteps start coming up the stairs. And now she's really freaking out. And then the voice in her mind says, don't be afraid. We're in your house. We're coming up the stairs. And she's thinking she's having this paranormal experience, that there's ghosts now and spirits coming up to her house. She's not thinking anything about aliens. And but she's terrified, and to the point where she thinks that she's going to have a heart attack, because her heart is just pounding on her chest, and these creaky stairs are coming closer. And then she manages to somehow turn her body, and she's lying on the bed, but she's not facing the opening in the door anymore. But she then hears and senses that something is in her room, and she senses this thing is now crawled up on the bed with her, and she is in complete hysterical sense. Like she's screaming inside her head, but she can't mouth it, she can't vocalize it. And then she feels fingers going over her body and on their head, and she's just beside herself. And all of a sudden, she feels this movement in the back of her head, and it's like somebody's whispering in the back of her head and blowing on the back of her neck. And when that happens, the fear that she experienced suddenly disappears, and she's calmer again. And then it just disappears. And within a few minutes, she's no longer paralyzed. She ends up, getting out of bed, but now she's hysterical because she doesn't know what's just happened to her, and she has to get out of the house. She picks up the phone. She can't reach her husband. She calls a friend and asks the friend to come pick her up, and she doesn't want to be in the house. She says she's had this experience, and the friend's trying to calm her down, and so she goes down to the kitchen to wait at the back door for this car to pull up. And as she is at the back door, she notices the clock on the wall, and the clock on the wall says 4:30 in the afternoon. And she distinctly remembers it was 1:30 when she went up to bed to start reading the book. And she thought 20 minutes at most had gone by, but it was really almost close to 2.5, 3 hours. It wasn't the first or the last time that this would happen. She had many experiences like that. Eventually, she began to get almost angry to the point where she could move, and several times she saw the outlines of what we would call grays in the room. But they were very horrifying experiences, and none that she would ever hope anybody else lives by, because it was like being in your own horror movie, she described it as.
That's incredible.
Yeah. I hope that nobody has dreams about that tonight.
Well,
but you can see why she thought it was a ghost experience, because,
absolutely.
A creaky old house. So.
Well, and another thing, too, is most people that would experience something like that, I'm sure, would feel the exact same way. I mean, and maybe if you look throughout history, when people have had an experience with an extraterrestrial, interdimensional type being, they look at it as a ghost or a demon or a spirit or a sylph or whatever.
Oh yeah, like that's what you would think normally.
Right.
I know we don't have much time. I just wanted to say something else about the Kelly incident. That after she told me all of her experiences, one of them, there was an experience where the alien had been taken her several times for in fertilization. Like she clearly remembers having babies taken away from her. But they told her soon after she had menopause that that would be the last encounter that she had, and that they wouldn't be visiting her anymore. And while she was relieved that was happening, part of her was sad. And she can't explain it because she didn't want to have to go through it anymore, but she missed knowing these beings and knowing the experiences. And that's why she said to me that she felt she had betrayed the confidence of these beings by telling me the story in the first place. It's hard to if you haven't experienced it, I guess it's hard to understand that feeling. And I really haven't encountered anybody else saying that they felt betrayed. They felt they were betraying somebody. But she actually has missed the encounters, even though they were mostly pretty terrifying.
Right. So are you putting something together right now? What's in the works for you, Bob?
Oh yeah. Actually three things. Since I did the book with Jason, I've had a shaman approach me to do a collaborative effort about the story of a shaman's personal journey. So I'm doing that right now. I have to admit I know nothing about shamanism, but by the time I'm finished, I probably will know more than I really want to know. And then Jason and I are going to do another book together that is going to take forbidden knowledge in an entirely different direction. I can't tell you who it's going to be on, but it's going to be on another person. And this is a person that people in the late night talk show radio genre that you're involved in will know the name once we are able to release it. But it's going to be a completely different story than you've been told. And we've actually signed the agreement today, so we're going to start working on that, and we hope to have it finished by Christmas.
Nice. That'll be an awesome stocking stuffer.
Yeah, and both Jason and I are going to be at the Alien Cosmic Expo, again, June 22nd to the 24th in Brantford. We'll be closing the show with Forbidden Knowledge, and I'll be talking about some of the stuff we talked tonight in another part of the show. And we're also been invited to attend a UFO conference in San Jose in October. So
oh, man, I thought you were going to say San Antonio.
No. Well, if there is one in San Antonio and they invite us, we'll be there. But we're ready to go wherever they want us to go, and I'm just, hopefully people will click on Amazon and buy my books and sit by the fire and try not to be too scared. And probably a lot of the stories they'll be able to relate to.
I got to jump in here real quick because you said sit by a fire and read these books. I'm thinking of like going out to the, Canyonlands or something and setting up a nice bonfire and getting you and Jason out there with me, and then you can tell some of these stories, man, because this is
I know
this
they're
is
like
good
campfire. I know they're like campfire stories, and that'd be neat to do it in the Grand Canyon with the Hopi. That'd be really good. Something to think about.
Well, I'll tell you,
Let's do it at the Alamo. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The Alamo's kind of a disappointment, though. Once you see it, you're like, nah, okay, let's go to the Riverwalk now. I mean, people want to see it so bad, and they get there, and they're just like,
Wasn't there something in San Antonio where they found the giant footprints?
I don't know, and I should know that if it's San Antonio because I should get video footage of that.
Yeah, I thought Riverwalk sounded familiar, but maybe I'm thinking something else.
Huh? I'll look into that.
I know it's in Texas somewhere.
Well, dang, I need to get on that. I'm definitely going to check out the MUFON lights here pretty soon because they're about 5 hours away from here and talk about a strange anomaly phenomenon that's been around for hundreds of years. I'm sure you've heard of them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's there's so much strange out there, and that's why I say we don't live in the world we think we do. It's a world that is strange and stranger than fiction, I believe. Because what we thought was fiction is actually not nonfiction.
Right.
Yeah. So you can get all my books on Amazon.com. What If, Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind, Intrusion, Alien Encounters, and the latest one, Forbidden Knowledge, Revelations of a Multidimensional Time Traveler.
What are your websites too?
Website is bobmitchellauthor.simplesite.com. That'll get you linked up to all the appearances in the books. And I have a blog site where I post things about everything, and it ends up on my Facebook, but it's bobmitchellauthor.wordpress.com.
Great.
And I can be reached at bobmitchellwriter@gmail.com.
All right. Well, this was an honor to have you on the show again with us, Bob. I certainly look forward to speaking with you again. Make sure to write another book soon so we can get you back on the show.
Well, I have so many other stories that people have given me that I could put out another experiencer book. I just don't know when I'm going to have the time to do it right now. But I'm sure I'll be doing it down the road.
Awesome. All right. Well, folks, I'd like to thank you for joining us tonight here at the Leak Project. Make sure to become a member with us. It's free. Subscribe to youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord. Get access to all the latest podcasts first and free. I'd also like to let our listeners know that pretty soon we're going to do a countrywide tour and get some really cool video footage as we go along the way. So if there's places that you want to see, whether it be Area 51 or Dulce, New Mexico, or somewhere out there where the crash was close to Roswell, you let us know and we'll do our best to get there. Thank you for everything, folks. Stay safe and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and we have returning guest Bob Mitchell with us, a journalist, best-selling author, researcher, lecturer, executive for MUFON Canada, and co-founder of Toronto Newswire Services. Now, a couple of Bob's most recent books, Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind, as well as Intrusion, Alien Encounters, are going to be the main focus of discussion here tonight because there's just a bunch of stuff in there that I know many of you that listen to the Leak Project enjoy hearing about. So these are just a few of Mr. Mitchell's gems from a collection of several books that he's put together. So quite the resume, Bob. And last time we spoke, it was about the book Forbidden Knowledge, Tales of a Multi-Dimensional Time Traveler. And I spoke with you as well as Jason. That was just a great podcast, a lot of really good reviews. I really enjoyed that. And when I read that book, you put it together so well. It was just very exciting to read. I had a tough time putting it down. So let's dive into your most recent works. And first of all, how the heck are you?
I'm fabulous, Rex. Our Forbidden Knowledge is still #1 on Amazon's Kindle and going strong. And now it's time to get back to the the normal alien type stories that I usually have been doing. And What If Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind is the kind of book that I think people, your listeners, will be both informed and entertained. And that's what I try to do every time I write something. I like to inform and entertain at the same time. And certainly there's a lot of different kinds of stories in that book that have never been told anywhere else before. And they're all first-timers in the book, and all very different. And I'm sure that the listeners will be intrigued by what I have to tell them.
You hear that, folks? You're going to hear it here first at the Leak Project. That'd be great, Bob. Let's get into that. Some of these these close encounters of the unusual kind. What's the first one that comes to mind?
Well, one of my favorite stories is actually the first one in the book, What If Close Encounters of the Unusual Kind. And it's my favorite story because it took me in a completely different direction than any other alien experience story that I ever encountered. And it also kind of opened my eyes to another possibility. And I think after the listeners will hear this story, they will more likely than not have a different take on what abductions could be and how connected we are to just everything in this universe. So it's a very, very interesting story, and you just want me to tell it? Is that the way you want me to do it?
Yeah, Bob, that'd be great. Let's jump right in. Walk us through it, like describe it as you would in the book to where we're kind of engulfed in the story. Yeah,
and if you have any questions, please stop me, and I'll be happy to answer them. And if anybody who's listening has a question, I'll take that too.
Perfect.
But the person in the book that told me this experience is his name is Satya Anand. Now, Satya Anand is actually his real name, or a name given to him by a Tibetan monk. It's not the name people would know who he goes by here in North America. He's fairly well known in Canada, this person, and he's a producer director, a two-time daytime Emmy-winning producer in the United States a few years ago with some things he did on the Discovery Channel. But at the time we were sitting down to talk about his experiences, he was in negotiations with some people who were going to give him several $1 million to do a project. And he wasn't quite sure what the reaction would be from them if they found out he had this other side to him. So we decided not to go with his real name, per se, that people would know him by, but still go with a name that was given to him by a Tibetan enlightened master, basically. So he's a real person, and it's his real name. It's just not the name that most people would know him by. But the story is absolutely true. So he was born in Montreal and grew up in a normal family. There was nothing unusual about him, except that he got into meditation very early in life, and it became basically a lifelong passion for him, and something he did every day and still continues to do every day. And he was fascinated by some of the people he met in Montreal who seemed to have connections to people in Tibet. And there was a family that not only had connections to Tibet, but they took their son over to Tibet to meet one of these enlightened masters. And so Satya thought that was really cool that a parents would do that. So he begged them to give him the contact information for this enlightened master, and eventually they did. And he went over to India with some friends originally, but actually spent about 29 years of his life, not all at once, but off and on, with 9 different trips over to India, and actually stayed in one of those Tibetan temples and learned everything he could about mysticism and reincarnation. He became a firm believer in reincarnation, and he also became very, very adept at astral traveling, much like Jason Quitt could do. Although he didn't have the same, time travel experience that Jason Quitt did. His was just the normal astral traveling, where he would leave his body and just sort of go to places and experience the oneness with the universe. Now, when I was first sat down to talk to him, I didn't know much about astral traveling, and I had heard about it and really didn't know anybody who ever did it before. But I'm since finding out with our book Forbidden Knowledge that quite a lot of people seem to know how to do this. But to me, it was completely foreign. So I asked him, how do I know that any of this is really true, that you have been doing this? And he told me a story about how when he was over in India, his girlfriend at the time was back in Montreal in the townhouse they were sharing. And he did an astral traveling from India where he he left his body and actually went into the townhouse that they were sharing with, and much to his surprise, his girlfriend was having an affair with somebody else. And he saw it clear as day. And back then, we didn't have the cell phones. We didn't have the internet that we have now. There wasn't instant text messaging. So what he did was he did a small tape recording on one of those mini cassettes and put it in the mail. And I guess 2 or 3 weeks later, it arrived in Canada. And when he arrived 6 months later, he went to the girlfriend's house, and she was quite embarrassed and admitted the entire affair that he had seen happening before his eyes, even though they were thousands and thousands of miles apart. So in my mind, I don't know the girlfriend, never talked to her, but I had no reason to believe he was lying to me. So I thought, well, that's pretty neat that he could have done that. But all his experiences were, in the astral world with 360-degree vision, and really wasn't into UFOs when this was going on, and didn't know much about aliens at all. He might have heard about the Greys, but it was just something he just wasn't interested in. Didn't even it wasn't even something he believed in, I don't think, at the time. But one day, about I think it was 5 years ago now, he was with some friends, and they came back to his Toronto condominium, and his friends went on the balcony. And he decided he was just going to go into the bedroom for a few moments and have, I guess, a power meditation nap, just to recharge his batteries, I guess. And he laid down, and then the way he tells the story is almost within seconds of lying down, and he had this feeling like he was being shot out of a cannon, out of his body. And it was a different experience than he had usually had with astral traveling before. And what happened almost immediately, he not only was shot out of his body, but he was shot through the roof of the house, and he up through the atmosphere, and before he knew it, he was in outer space and traveling very fast, and he could actually see the planets go by, and he could recognize the Earth, and it was getting smaller and smaller, and then Mars and Venus and all the planets. But as this was happening, he actually looked down at himself, and lo and behold, it wasn't this 160-degree experience that he had had before. At this time, he could see his body. He could see the Docker pants that he had on when he would lie down in the bed. He had the same running shoes on. He had the same T-shirt. He could feel his face and his hair. And so he was in this physical form, yet he was traveling through outer space without a space suit on. He was breathing fine, and he was just accelerating faster and faster, and could not figure out what was going on. And eventually he left the solar system, and he expected to see more stars and keep going. And suddenly he found himself in just utter blackness. There was nothing around him whatsoever. But as he sort of floated there, because the acceleration had stopped, and as he floated there, he had this feeling that there was something or somebody watching him, staring at him. It was almost eye piercing. He described it as if you're in a car and you're stopped at a stop sign or stop light, and you look over because the person in the car next to you has been staring at you, and when you quickly look over, they turn their head quickly so they don't want you to know. It was that sense that something was staring at him, and it was really strong. And suddenly, in the distance, something is coming towards him. And you got to remember, he doesn't know anything about aliens really other than Greys. So before he could take a deep breath, if that was possible in outer space, but before certainly he had any emotions of fear or horror, what he was looking at, right in front of his face, like within inches of his face, was this huge being. And he describes it as being at least 30 feet tall, perhaps even bigger. And it had giant eyes in the head, and the head he thought had to be at least 5 feet large, and because the eyes were 3 or 4 feet big, and it had the image of almost a mechanical insect. That was the way he described it, because the head seemed to be like an insect, but the long arms that were flailing by its side, they seemed almost mechanical in some ways. But instead of feeling fear, the only emotion that came to him, and it was a very, very strong emotion, was this overwhelming feeling of love and attachment to this being. And it was kind of love that he said was stronger than even the kind of love that you would have for your parents or even your wife or girlfriend. It was this intense love that filled his entire body. And while he's there, there's a telepathic communication. And during this telepathic communication, he has this feeling that he knows this being, and it's so strong that he asks this being, have we been together before? And the answer he gets back is yes from the being. And then he says, he looks at the being and he looks at himself, and he telepathically says to the being, in your form or in my form? And the answer he gets back is, it's in the being's form. And that really freaked him out at that point. And then he asks him, will we be together again? And the being says yes. And again he says, in your form or my form? And the being says, in its form. And within seconds of that, he finds himself back in his bed, and he wakes up. And when he wakes up, he has this wow moment, because all his life he believed in reincarnation. He believed that he has had past lives on Earth, and that he has possibly even been an animal or a plant, but was always Earth-based. And now suddenly he had this revelation that reincarnation wasn't just something that happened on Earth, but when you came back, you could come back as anything in the universe, because we all were connected to one source. And sometimes you live a life as an alien, and sometimes you live a life as a human being. And he quite soon tried to look up on the internet to find anything that resembled what he had seen up there. And he eventually found something, and of course it was the well-known mantid creature that has been very popular in the last 5 years at least. People are talking all about mantids all the time. And in fact, in my book, Intrusion, Alien Encounters, there's 2 people that have had mantis experiences. And although their experiences were with 7 or 8 foot tall creatures, they all had the exact same overwhelming love for this creature. It wasn't any fear whatsoever. So after digesting what Santa Anya had said to me, and knowing that other people have had this experience, it seemed to me that this love, this strong connection, is actually something that has happened in a past life. That these are celestial beings that are part of everybody's makeup, and that the reason there's so much love between them is that they're actually probably looking at your relatives from another timeline, maybe, or from another dimension. But somehow the mantis beings are connected to humans, because most humans who have had abduction experiences certainly don't describe abductions by greys or hooded beings as being nice and loving. It's always fearful and horrible. So I think the Santa Anna's experience may just open the doors to a lot of people who have had these experiences. It certainly made me rethink some of the things that were happening. And in fact, maybe if I can take that even one step further, if reincarnation does exist everywhere in the universe, perhaps that when people are being abducted, and I believe they're probably being abducted mostly in a conscious form, not in a physical form, but when they're abducted into like the 4th dimension or other multi-dimensions, that perhaps they are being abducted by their own relatives. That somewhere along the line they've told them that when they come back in this form, you will be taken back to see us again. Because so many people that I've talked to during their abduction experiences, at some point they have a telepathic communication that says to them, we're doing this because you agreed to this. And I don't know anybody who would agree to such an experience unless